Good day, digital nurses. I'm your digital nurse educator, Ben. Today, we'll have a discussion about nursing research and evidence based practice. Nurses today are actively involved in generating and publishing evidence in order to improve client care and expand nursing's knowledge base. At a minimum, all nurses need a basic understanding of the research process and its relationship to the evidence based practice. So, what is evidence based practice? Evidence based practice or evidence based nursing occurs when the nurse can integrate best practice evidence with clinical expertise and patient or family preferences and values for delivery of optimal healthcare. Thus, as evidence changes, so much practice. Based on published research studies, there are steps in changing practice. The first step is to cultivate a spirit of inquiry. Nurses need to be curious and willing to investigate how various practices compare and which might be best for the specific client. Then, ask clinical questions. For consistency and efficiency, nurses should state the question in a standard format such as the PICO. Later, we'll have a detailed discussion about PICO or the PICO. Next is to search for the best evidence. In the previous step, key terms are identified that facilitate identifying relevant evidence in the literature. Then this is followed by critically appraising the evidence. Several toolkits or schema are available to assist the nurse in determining the most valid, reliable, and applicable evidence. In some cases, relevant studies may already have been synthesized. The next step is to integrate the evidence with clinical expertise and client or family preferences and values. Each nurse must determine how the evidence fits with the clinical condition of the client, available resources, institutional policies, and the client's wishes. Only then can an appropriate intervention be established. And lastly, implement and evaluate the outcomes of the intervention. The nurse gathers all relevant data that may indicate whether or not the intervention was successful. If the outcomes varied from those reported in the evidence, this evaluation can help determine the reasons for the variable responses and will contribute to improving the evidence available for future situations. Some scholars contend that while evidence includes theories, opinions of recognized experts, clinical expertise, clinical experiences, and findings from client assessments, findings from research studies are often given the most weight in the decision making process. This emphasis is because research entails using formal and systematic processes to address problems and answers questions. On the other hand, other scholars and practitioners express concerns about the current prominence and consumption of EBP as primarily using research as the source of evidence. Here are some of the concerns on EBP. First, research is often done under very controlled circumstances, which is very different from the real world of healthcare delivery. Second, research evidence suggests that there is one best solution to a problem for all clients and this limit perspective creativity. Then scholars argues that research may ignore the significance of life events to the individual. Nursing care should consider feasibility, appropriateness, meaningfulness, and effectiveness or the fame of the interventions and plans. Additionally, it was contended that not all published research is robust and flawless. And lastly, scholars mention that EBP should promote cost-effective care, but cost is often not included in the traditional research studies. So what then now is nursing research? As early as 1854, Florence Nightingale demonstrated how research findings improve nursing care. Currently, accrediting organizations require all baccalaureate and higher degree programs to include coursework in research and evidence-based practice. The Journal of Nursing Research was first published in 1952 to serve as a vehicle for communicating nurses' research findings. In 1895, after intense lobbying by the American Nurses Association or the ANA, the US Congress passed a bill creating the National Center for Nursing Research as part of the National Institute of Health, or the NIH. Nurse researchers use two major approaches to investigate clients' responses to health alterations and nursing interventions. These approaches are quantitative and qualitative research originate from different philosophical perspectives and generate different types of data. Quantitative research entails the systematic collection, statistical analysis, and interpretation of numerical data. Quantitative research is characterized by planned and fixed study processes, careful attention to extraneous variables. These are any variables that could influence the results of the study other than the specific variables being studied for the influence, or contaminating factors in the study environment, and an objective and distance relationship between the researcher and what is being studied. Reports of quantitative research are characterized by statistical information, tables, and graphs, which can make them intimidating to read. The quantitative approach to research is linked to the philosophical perspective of logical positivism, which maintains that truth is absolute and can be discovered by careful measurement. Comparatively, qualitative research is the systematic collection and thematic analysis of narrative data. In other words, the research collects and analyzes words rather than numbers. The qualitative approach to research is rooted in the philosophical perspective of naturalism. This is sometimes referred to as constructivism, which maintains that reality is relative and constructed by individuals who are experiencing a phenomenon. Qualitative research has a holistic perspective and results in a report that may read like a story. So nurse researchers tend to use one or the three distinct qualitative traditions such as phenomenology, ethnography, and grounded theory. Let us now proceed to the research process. Nurses who are reading research reports to inform their practice need a basic understanding of the research process in order to judge the credibility of a study's findings and their usefulness for EBP. Although the research process unfolds somewhat differently from quantitative and qualitative studies, the same general steps are involved, such as formulating the research problem and purpose, determining study methods, collecting research data, analyzing research data, communicating research findings, and using research findings in practice. Let's discuss the first step, formulating the research problem and purpose. The researcher's first task is to narrow a broad area of interest into a more specific problem that indicates that the issue of concern behind the study. Because conducting a study requires resources and time and effort of study participants, a research problem should be significant to nursing and offer the potential to improve client care. The problem must also be feasible to study in light of the resources, including time and skill, that are available to conduct the study. A study's purpose statement is characterized by an action verb that indicates whether the study will provide descriptive information, explanatory information, cause and effect information, or information that will allow prediction and control. A study's purpose statement has important implications for how the study will be conducted and how the data collected will be analyzed. One strategy for stating the problem you wish to explore is to use the PICO format. PICO is a mnemonic for P is for patient, population, or problem of interest. I is for intervention or therapy to consider for the subject of interest. C is comparison of intervention such as no treatment. And O is outcome of the intervention. Formulating the research problem and purpose is facilitated by conducting review of related literature. This literature review helps the researcher become familiar with the current state of knowledge in regards to the problem area and build on the knowledge when designing the current study. The next step is determining the study methods. The methodological elements of the research process deal with how the study is organized, who or what will be the sources of information for the study, and the data collection details such as what data will be collected, how data will be collected, and the timing of the data collection. The first methodological decision made by the researcher is whether the study will use quantitative or qualitative research approach. Additionally, another important part of the research method is the research design. And this refers to the overall structure or blueprint or general layout of the study. The research design indicates how many times data will be collected in a study, the timing of data collection relative to other study events, the types of relationship between variables that are being examined, the number of groups being compared in the study, and how extraneous variables will be controlled so that study findings are more reliable and accurate. There are two major types of research design. Experimental design. This type of research design, the researcher controls the independent variable by administering an experimental treatment to some participants while withholding it from others. Experimental designs are used to determine cause and effect relationships. On the other hand, non-experimental design shows that there is no manipulation of the independent variable. In fact, there may be no identifiable independent and dependent variables in the study. Non-experimental designs are used for descriptive research studies. For sample sources, another key methodological decision is determining who or what will provide the data for the study. The sample is a carefully chosen segment of the target population. Sampling decisions are also a key factor in the usefulness of the study's findings for evidence-based practice. The next step in the process is collecting research data. Nurse researchers use a wide variety of data collection strategies, including questionnaires, interviews, observation, record reviews, and biophysical measures. Data collection decisions spell out how any intervention that is going to be administered to study participants will be implemented. Various procedures are available for establishing the reliability and validity of the research data. Reliability refers to the consistency of measures, while validity refers to the completeness and conceptual accuracy of measures. Moving on to the next step is analyzing the research data. During the data analysis stage of the research process, the collected data are organized and analyzed to answer the research questions to test the study's hypothesis. There are various statistical procedures involved in this step. First, the descriptive statistics. These are procedures that organize and summarize large volumes of data, including measures of central tendency and measures of variability. So measures of central tendency provide a single numerical value that denotes the average value for a variable, while measures of variability describes how values for a variable are dispersed or spread out. The use of inferential statistics allow researchers to test hypotheses about the relationship between variables or differences between groups. The fifth step is communicating research findings. Research findings must be made public if they become accessible and used to guide practice decisions. Research findings can be communicated through publications, in journals, or at conferences. The last step in the process is to use research findings in practice. Before a study's findings are used to guide practice, they should undergo three types of evaluation. These evaluations are scientific validation, comparative analysis, and cost-beneficial appraisal. Let us discuss each. Scientific validation is a thorough critique of a study for its conceptual and methodological integrity. This means scrutinizing how the study was conceptualized, designed, and conducted in order to make a judgment about the overall quality of its findings. Comparative analysis involves assessing study findings for their implementation potential. Three factors are considered here: how the study's findings are compared to the findings from other studies about a problem, how the study's findings will transfer from the research condition to the clinical practice conditions in which they will be used, and lastly, practical or feasibility considerations that need to be addressed when applying the findings in practice. Lastly, the cost-benefit analysis involves consideration of the potential risks and benefits of both implementing a change based on the study's findings and not implementing a change. Both immediate and delayed potential costs and benefits to clients, nursing staff, and organization as a whole should be considered. While the evaluation of the EBP innovation, the research process begins again. Our last topic is research-related responsibilities, protecting the rights of the study of participants. Before any research on humans can be started, the researcher must obtain approval from the relevant committee or designated to protect human rights. This committee is often called the Institutional Review Board or the IRB. The IRB ensures that all clients are informed of and understand the consequences of consenting to serve as a research participants. There are various rights that needs to be considered here. First, right not to be harmed. The risk of harm to research subject is exposure to possibility of injury going beyond everyday situations. The risk can be immediate or delayed and can be physical, emotional, legal, financial, or social in nature. Potential risk of participating in a study need to be detailed in informed consent documents. The right to full disclosure. Full disclosure is the act of making clear the client's role in a research situation is a basic right. This means that deception by either withholding information about the client's participation in a study or giving the clients false or misleading information about what participating in the study will involve must not occur. Right to self-determination. The right to self-determination means that participants should feel free from constraints, coercion, or any undue influence to participate in a study. Hidden inducements, for instance, suggesting to potential participants that by taking part in the study, they might become famous, make an important contribution to science, or receive special attention must strictly be avoided. Lastly, the right to privacy. Privacy enables a client to participate without worrying about later embarrassment. The anonymity of the study participants must be ensured even if the investigator cannot link a specific person to the information reported. This is where confidentiality comes in. It means that any information a participant relates will not be made public or available to others without the participant's consent. So in summary, we discussed various topics of evidence-based practice and a detailed discussion on the research process. And this ends our discussion. Again, this is your digital nurse educator Ben, and thank you and see you on our next discussion.